The email came through at 11:47 p.m. on New Year's Eve, right as I was lighting the last of the votives on my grandmother's antique candelabra. Subject line, Final Transition Sign-Off. No context, no warning, just a PDF and a polite little note from a junior legal associate who'd never written me directly before. I opened the file, skimmed the first page, and my chest tightened. It wasn't a sign-off. It was a quiet erasure. They'd reclassified my entire patent bundle, every last protocol I'd built over a decade, under a new asset group labeled Unified IP Stack Rev 1. No engineer signature, no timestamp from me, just a checkbox next to reclassified for internal consolidation. And there it was, in smaller print at the bottom of page 2. By proceeding, you confirm prior contributions have been voluntarily reassigned under corporate stewardship guidelines, effective Jan 1. They wanted me to sign away 12 years of my work before midnight, as if I were drunk off champagne, as if I wasn't watching, as if I didn't know exactly what they were doing. That's when I knew the cleanup wasn't just about systems. It was about people. People like me. Pause here a second. If you're still listening, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. We pour everything into these stories, and 97% of listeners don't hit that button, but it makes all the difference for our team. Thanks. Now back to it. I closed the file without responding, sat still for a long time, just breathing in the weight of what they'd tried to slip past me. My name wasn't on any press release. I never chased LinkedIn glory or founder spotlights. I was the one in the back room at 2 a.m. when our failover sequence held through a regional outage. I was the reason Haventhal Group even considered Cyvex for their $210 million hybrid infrastructure contract. But the ones now running the show, Raymond's son Tyler and his new crop of high-gloss execs, decided I was legacy code, a leftover from the old guard. And maybe I had been, until that night. Raymond had always honored the handshake we'd started with, a simple, you build it, it's yours pact that later became Clause 18C in our contributor agreement. It wasn't flashy, just one paragraph that said no patent, no asset, no derivative license built on my original commits could be reassigned without my active consent, as long as I remained consultative. And I did. I kept a single session token alive in our architecture review system, logging in just once a week. That was all it took to remain active, just enough to keep my finger on the pulse, enough to qualify as a legal obstacle if someone got greedy. They forgot that, or ignored it. And now they were trying to sweep $500 million in intellectual property under the rug before fireworks went off. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I did what I always do. I ran the numbers. Pulled my time-stamped Git commits, archived the original folder trees, took screenshots of my weekly logins, made a copy of the signed contributor agreement, and marked the signature trail. Then I made a pot of coffee. Strong. Black. The kind you make when something inside you shifts from weary to ready. The rest of the night I didn't sleep. I cataloged everything. Every line of code, every version history, every instance my name showed up as originator. Tyler's name wasn't on any of it. And neither was legal's. They'd built a house of glass, assuming I wouldn't throw the first stone. At 5:52 a.m., I sent one email, just one, to Civex's external IP counsel, marked high priority, no long preamble, just the clause, the evidence, and a notice of intent to freeze all affected patents pending violation review. It was the quietest declaration of war they'd ever receive. And I knew, before the morning turned to Monday, someone would realize they'd just tried to rob the wrong woman. Tyler came in like every trust fund storm does, wearing a $3,000 blazer, swinging jargon like a machete, and preaching efficiency to people who'd built the systems he couldn't define if his trust payout depended on it. From day one, it was clear he saw Cyvex as a playground, not a platform. Legacy bloat became his favorite phrase, so did zero drag velocity. I heard him say once in a town hall, "We're not here to maintain, we're here to disrupt," which is a bold thing to say in a building held together by the very infrastructure you're mocking. At first, I let it slide. Watched from the side as he brought in his hand-picked crew, sunglasses inside guys with crypto startups on their resumes and egos wrapped in VC buzzwords. They rewrote org charts before understanding the back-end topology, pushed updates that broke staging, rebranded our quarterly releases without knowing what they shipped. Still, I stayed out of it. I'd seen worse. In tech, every new emperor thinks they're reinventing the wheel until the axle snaps and they go scrambling for someone with a wrench. But early December, that's when it shifted. I started hearing whispers from engineering ops. That legal was floating streamlined disclosure updates. They weren't calling it a reclassification, just a refresh of records to align legacy assets with future IP strategy. Most of my peers got forms to re-sign. Simple, stripped-down declarations of work done under Civex's roof. Just housekeeping, they said. I got nothing. No form, no email, just a calendar invite for a 9:30 a.m. sit-down. Subject line, Transition Planning, Legacy Systems Sunset. Attendees, Tyler Grant, a legal intern whose name I didn't recognize, and me. That's when I knew, not suspected. Knew. This wasn't about modernizing, it was about disappearing people who made things inconvenient. People like me, people with clauses. So I pulled out my old files. Back when Raymond and I drew up the contributor agreement, I didn't ask for a flashy title or founder's equity. I just wanted protection. Ironclad, no wiggle room protection for the IP I built. We crafted Clause 18C together, line by line, over stale bagels and worse coffee. It reads like a tripwire wrapped in velvet. No transfer, reclassification, or license may be executed on protected technologies without the consent of the originating engineer, if active or consultative, as certified by time-stamped project records. It means that unless I'm legally dead or voluntarily dormant, no one touches my IP. Not legal, not the CEO, not even the board. And I'd made damn sure to maintain weekly session activity, just enough to be classified as active. More importantly, I had the logs to prove it. Hundreds of time-stamped commits. Every microservice tweak, every patch, every architecture note pushed with my user ID. No proxies, no exceptions. I printed the clause, highlighted it, then laid it next to Tyler's invite. And I waited. Because here's what these disruptor types never understand. When you move fast and break things, the only person you should be afraid of is the one who built what you're breaking. And I was right there, quiet, watching, holding the one string they didn't know was threaded through the whole machine. The room they booked for it was one of those fake modern glass boxes with too many echo points and not enough chairs. Just a sleek white table, a screen that no one turned on, and a pitcher of untouched water sweating onto a branded coaster. I walked in at 9:27, sat across from Tyler, and nodded once. He looked up from his phone like I'd interrupted a podcast on startup dominance. The junior legal rep, couldn't have been more than 25, was already typing notes that would never be saved. She didn't even look at me, just sat there, tapping away like she was billing hours no one would read. Tyler leaned back in his chair like he'd been waiting to deliver this speech all his life. "We're simplifying things," he began, with that smugness only a man born into power can master. "Some of the legacy code bases, yours especially, are being absorbed into the new unified stack. No offense, but it's time." He said it with a smile. The kind of smile people wear when they think they're about to put you in a nice retirement slideshow while they gut the machine you built. I stared at him a second longer than I should have, just to see if there was any flicker of awareness behind those startup eyes. Nothing. So I asked, flatly, "Are you reclassifying the patents or just shifting license anchors?" That stopped the smile for a breath. He blinked. "Legal's handling it." I turned my head slowly, glanced at the intern still tapping like her life depended on avoiding eye contact, then looked back. And then came the line. "Will credit you spiritually." Not financially. Not legally, not even nominally. Spiritually. Like I was some kind of ghost they could wave incense at in a quarterly report. A footnote in their myth-making. That was the moment it happened. I didn't flinch, didn't scoff, didn't even blink. I simply detached. Emotionally, I was gone. They thought I'd fight, thought I'd protest or play the wounded genius. But the truth is, when someone shows you who they are in a glass room at 9:30 on a Tuesday, you don't argue. You archive. I stood up. No folder. No goodbyes. Just nodded once at the intern, who finally looked up, confused, and walked out. Didn't head back to my office. Didn't check in with engineering ops. I got in my car, drove home, changed into flannel and wool socks, and opened the fireproof file cabinet in my study. Found the original contributor agreement, Ink still rich, the signature chain crisp, and laid it on the desk like a chessboard. Clause 18C, right there in black and white, and they just walked directly into it. I booted up the offline terminal where I store project backups, pulled my commit logs, every contribution, every signature, every traceable link back to my ID. Then I opened my calendar, created a draft email to Civex's External IP Council. Subject: Immediate notice, unauthorized activity, protected IP. I didn't hit send. Not yet. Because the real power isn't in reacting, it's in waiting until they think you've accepted the slight, until they relax, until they move 1 inch too far. Then you tug the string and watch the tapestry rip straight through the middle. And I knew Tyler hadn't read the contributor agreement, but he was about to learn what happens when someone who did starts pulling levers. At exactly 6:03 a.m., the file dropped. Not from my personal account, that would have been too emotional. It came from my counsel's secure delivery line, addressed formally to Civex's external IP firm, the one Tyler loved to quote in board meetings like they were some kind of divine authority. Subject: Action blocked, unauthorized patent reclassification. Just that. Nothing spicy, no anger, no drama, just the kind of subject line that makes law firms delay their lattes and close the door. The email had 3 attachments. First, the contributor agreement, fully signed, notarized, digitally certified, Clause 18C highlighted in red. That clause wasn't just boilerplate, it was a lockbox with a nameplate, and the name wasn't his. Second, a PDF of my full Git commit log going back 12 years, marked with weekly activity logs proving continuous engagement. Even the minor patches were in there, down to the damn hotfix I pushed on Christmas Eve last year to keep a staging node from crashing. I didn't miss a week, not one. There was no way they could argue dormancy. Third, a time-stamped export of Tyler's planned migration folders. Internal docs, screen captures, metadata chains. I'd pulled them quietly weeks ago when I noticed a spike in background indexing traffic near my branch trees. He hadn't even changed the folder names. One literally said, Legacy Sweep, Full Merge, Pre-John 1. The arrogance practically glowed. At the bottom of the message, my attorney added one last flourish, a legal freeze notice issued through the holding trust that had housed the patent IP since Raymond and I first structured it. That freeze wasn't symbolic. It had teeth. Once activated, it triggered a clause in our licensing system that halted all asset transitions tied to those patents. Any downstream movement, reassignments, sublicenses, derivative licenses, valuation-based collateralizations, got locked in legal purgatory until clearance from the originator. That's me. By 6:37 a.m., I saw the first alert hit my monitoring system. Downstream transfer request, flagged, access denied. Then another. Then 8 more. One after another, every licensing automation tied to my IP went dark. Someone in legal had tried to push through a routine morning batch, probably still in yesterday's clothes, thinking they'd start the year clean. Instead, the system froze everything. I didn't smile, not because it didn't feel good, but because this wasn't the win. This was the warning shot, and it landed hard. By 7:12, Civex's internal counsel called my lawyer, left a message using phrases like unexpected complication and possible clerical misalignment. Translation: they were trying to buy time to figure out just how bad it was. But there was no ambiguity. Clause 18C didn't leave room for misinterpretation. You don't get to reclassify proprietary architecture from an active contributor, not without consent. And mine had not only not been given, it had been legally withdrawn in writing, time-stamped and countersigned, which meant every move Tyler had made, every plan for his unified stack, was now tied to locked IP, and the clock was ticking. They'd assumed I was just part of the old scaffolding, something to be cleared out with the rest of the dusty systems. What they didn't realize, what Tyler didn't realize, is that I wasn't the scaffolding. I was the foundation. And the weight of his ambitions had just slammed into a clause written by someone who planned for this very kind of power grab. So while Civex's legal team scrambled and the licensing bots choked on 403 errors, I poured another cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and clicked refresh on my back-end monitor. There it was. line after line of blocked transfer attempts, redacted names, frozen payloads, and at the top of the log, one line blinking softly. Author override enacted. Status immutable. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the system speak in the only language it knows. Access denied. By noon, the whole west wing of Civex's legal floor looked like a bomb shelter. Lights on, blinds drawn, phone lines humming like hornets. They were trying to play it off externally, of course. Press releases still talked about forward motion and IP alignment milestones. But inside, the walls were sweating, because someone had finally asked the one question that rattled the windows. Who still holds the keys? And the answer wasn't Tyler. Legal sent out an urgent inquiry to engineering ops, masked as routine confirmation. They wanted to know if any part of the reclassification had successfully processed before the freeze hit. Specifically, they needed to prove that at least some of the unified stack could move forward without triggering a breach. It was a fantasy. A legal Hail Mary, because they hadn't just pushed too fast, they'd pushed without understanding how deeply I'd tied my name into the structure. I didn't just write the code, I sealed every single critical function with embedded signature markers, cryptographic flags that verified authorship and modification time at the commit level, built on blockchain, immutable by design. If you tried to rewrite it, the system would know. If you cloned it and reassigned authorship, the hash trail would break. If you copied and pasted into a clean repo, the fingerprint would still ping on the original ledger and flag the derivative as unauthorized. It wasn't a security measure, it was an ownership mechanism, and it was working exactly as intended. By 12:43 p.m., I saw the panic go live. My back-end monitor showed access surges on the signature trails. Someone, maybe Tyler himself, was trying to isolate clean files. They were hunting for gaps. Places where the patent chain might have expired or where no commit tied directly to my ID. They found nothing, because I planned for this moment. Even the smallest modules, ones they thought were throwaway scripts, looped through my architecture at some level. Microservices? Tagged. Build triggers? Signed. Licensing automation? Stamped. I didn't just leave breadcrumbs. I left landmines, and now they were stepping on every single one. The worst part wasn't that their system froze. The worst part was that everything was time-stamped, so there was no plausible deniability. Every decision Tyler made, from the internal email ordering the reclassification to the dev tickets referencing my repo trees, was now part of a permanent record, which meant they couldn't unpull the thread. They couldn't even pretend it was a misunderstanding, and the real disaster hadn't hit yet, because all of this was happening 3 weeks before Civex was set to finalize a massive licensing agreement with Haventhal Group. Projected value, $210 million, core technology, mine. Specifically, the cross-cloud redundancy protocols, the edge latency compression sequences, and the cryptographic call sign library, all three of which were explicitly covered under Clause 18C. So now those patents weren't just frozen, they were radioactive. And somewhere in a glass office with modern art no one understood, Tyler was finally realizing that he hadn't just pissed off a legacy engineer. He'd trapped himself in a contract he didn't write, inside a system he didn't build, guarded by a clause he never read. And I didn't have to lift a finger, because everything they were panicking over was just the system working as intended. One clause, one contributor, and an entire company running out of moves. The call came in at 4:58 p.m. on Friday, just as Civex's exec team was convincing themselves the week couldn't get worse. 1 minute, they were gathered in the main conference room reviewing talking points for Monday's all-hands. The next, their licensing lead was standing in the doorway, white as the whiteboard behind her, holding out a phone. It's Haventhal, line 2, urgent. Not checking in, not touching base. Urgent. Tyler took the call, expecting a polite nudge or maybe a small delay in signatures. What he got was silence, then steel. Can you confirm who authorized the IP lock currently affecting the redundancy protocols listed under Schedule B? The Haventhal exec asked flatly. Because our counsel just received a freeze notice from a holding trust associated with a contributor agreement you apparently didn't disclose. There was no bluff in his voice, no confusion, just controlled legal fire. Tyler, from what I heard, mumbled something about internal realignment. and unfortunate timing. But Haventhal's general counsel had already pulled the contract, and that's when the clause landed. Buried in section 9.3.2 of the licensing agreement, the Haventhal clause. It wasn't just a cancellation penalty, it was a reverse penalty, one the Cyvex legal team had brushed past during negotiations, too focused on the flashy term sheet numbers to read the teeth. Any pre-transfer obstruction, including legal freeze, authorship dispute, or undisclosed IP encumbrance, invalidates exclusivity rights and triggers a 3.5% reverse penalty based on projected deal value. $210 million, 3.5% per day. That's $7.35 million every 24 hours starting from the moment the freeze activated, which, thanks to my time-stamped notice, was 6:03 a.m. Wednesday. Friday's call? Already $14.7 million on the ledger, and climbing. Tyler didn't say a word after that clause was read out loud. Apparently, he just set the phone down gently, like it might explode if he breathed too hard, because he knew what that meant. Not just the financial hit, not just the embarrassment, but the fact that Haventhal now had the legal leverage to walk. Publicly. Loudly. And the moment they did, other partners would start asking what else had been built on legacy code Tyler tried to sweep under the rug. And more importantly, who else held keys they weren't told about. I wasn't in the room when the board got the update, but I imagine it was quiet. The kind of quiet that sits behind glass walls and watches bonuses dissolve in real time. Because this wasn't just a freeze anymore, it was a breach. A contractual, operational, reputational breach, and Tyler had triggered it. All because he thought deleting a name from a folder would erase the history behind it. What he didn't understand, what he never cared to learn, is that IP doesn't live on slides or org charts. It lives in authorship, in provenance, in signatures he never earned. So now Cyvex was staring down a partner with a kill clause, a contract breach, a daily penalty, and a documented trail of who warned them. And me? I was still at home, still quiet, still waiting, because I didn't need to push the system over. He already lit the match. All I did was show them where the fuse was. The email came in at 3:22 a.m., the kind of hour reserved for regrets and reckoning. Civex's lead counsel had written me directly, not through paralegals, not through legalazavex.com, direct, personal, and painfully careful. Subject: urgent, resolution discussion. 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 1. A polished apology dipped in legal restraint. They regretted the confusion. They now recognized the scope of the authorial protections outlined under Clause 18C. They admitted Tyler had been unaware of the clause's operational weight and that certain internal assumptions had led to oversights. Translation: we thought you were obsolete. We thought we could bury you in a folder and hope the system didn't care. Paragraph 2 was flattery packaged as olive branch. They emphasized my critical legacy contributions, and this part almost made me laugh. Described me as an irreplaceable pillar of Cyvex's early innovation arc. The same woman who couldn't get a code review approved without 3 layers of VP sign-off 6 months ago was suddenly a pillar. Amazing what a $7.3 million a day fine can do for your memory. Paragraph 3 was the real play. We'd like to propose immediate reinstatement, it said, alongside a discretionary equity award to reflect your enduring value to the company. They didn't specify how much equity, didn't reference role or scope, just the word discretionary, which is corporate for whatever number we can float without making the board flinch. I read it once, didn't scroll back, didn't reread the apology, I just forwarded it to my attorney. He replied 6 minutes later, copying Cyvex's legal lead and external counsel. 1 line. Reinstatement is unnecessary. Clause 18C speaks for itself. That was it. No negotiation, no counteroffer, no Zoom meeting where someone would pretend to cry because they didn't want to make things right. They wanted to make things quiet. But that ship sailed the moment they assumed I was expendable. They had built their next big valuation on top of a foundation they neither understood nor owned. They thought the stack would hold. They thought the old names wouldn't matter. They thought contributors were just bricks in a wall, and now they were realizing some bricks hold the whole thing up. It wasn't about the job anymore, not the title, not even the patents. It was about being treated like a cautionary tale, like a footnote in a startup memoir written by a CEO's son who thought legacy meant disposable. I didn't need to be reinstated, because I'd never actually left. My work was still in the system, my name was still in the chain, and my clause was still doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect the architecture from anyone arrogant enough to think they could own what they didn't understand. Let them draft apologies at 3 in the morning. I was already writing the next chapter, and this time I wouldn't be asking permission. They tried to dress it up as a strategic realignment briefing, but no one at that table believed it. Not on a Monday, not after a weekend like that. Everyone was already seated when Raymond Grant walked in, slow, cane in hand, but spine straighter than any of the execs flanking him. Still majority shareholder, still the founder. And, by the look in his eyes, still the only person in that room with a working memory of what Cyvex was built on. Next to him sat Haventhal's licensing partner. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was pressure enough. If she'd flown in on a Monday morning in Q1, the board already knew there were millions leaking out of the company every 24 hours, and none of them had an umbrella big enough to stop it. Tyler showed up last. Tan from the holidays, caffeinated, wearing a navy suit a little too tight around the chest, like he was trying to appear broader than he really was. He walked in like this was still his narrative to control, until he saw the stack of printed documents at each seat. Until he noticed the screen hadn't been connected to a slide deck or a forecast dashboard, but to a static display. One sentence, black on white. Protected clauses irrevocable without originator consent. That was it. No logo, no branding, just the clause. Clause 18C, summarized for the benefit of anyone who hadn't bothered to read the fine print in the contributor agreement they tried to bulldoze. Tyler paused, briefly, like he was about to argue formatting, but Raymond beat him to the silence. He turned, slow, deliberate, all the weight of legacy behind his gaze, and looked straight at his son. Did you really think you could wipe her name from $500 million in patents? Not remove, not restructure, wipe. And he didn't say legacy contributor. He didn't even say engineer. He said her name. Tyler opened his mouth, closed it. What was there to say? The documents showed everything. Timestamps, freeze notices, the licensing chain Haventhal flagged, the penalty tally growing by the hour, and the log that tracked every attempt to circumvent authorial consent, all bearing his credentials. The board was quiet. Not the kind of quiet where people are waiting to speak, the kind where everyone already knows the ending. They're just letting the villain finish reading his own obituary. Legal said something then, something bland about reviewing next steps. But it was just filler, because the room had already shifted. Haventhal's partner stood. She placed her copy of the clause summary back on the table. We will require authorial affirmation before any further processing, she said. No apology, no nuance, just the weight of a $210 million gate slamming shut. Raymond didn't say another word. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room understood what had just happened. The founder's son tried to erase the wrong name, and in doing so, reminded everyone exactly whose work still held the keys to the company's future. Tyler left the room before the meeting adjourned. He didn't take his laptop, didn't shake hands, because in that moment, he wasn't the CEO. He was the man who lit a match in a server room, thinking no one would smell the smoke. But I was still there, written into the walls, and now everyone could see the fireproof signature at the foundation. By the end of Q1, the company line was simple. Tyler Grant had stepped down to explore other ventures. No press release, no send-off event, just a sterile internal memo circulated late on a Thursday afternoon, followed by the quiet removal of his profile from the executive page, like he'd never been there in the first place. The real story, of course, didn't make it into headlines, but it made it into the 10K, buried beneath fiscal projections, restructuring notes, and sanitized phrases like portfolio reevaluation. There it was. A $26 million line item labeled IP-based operational disruption charge. No footnote explaining the cause. No name attached. Just the monetary scar tissue of a gamble gone wrong. A week later, I received a letter. Cream paper, no return address, no salutation, no signature. Just a single sentence, typed and centered. This letter serves as formal acknowledgement of the preservation of authorship across all legacy contributions enumerated under the contributor agreement currently in effect. It wasn't an apology, it was a surrender. A quiet, corporate bow. I didn't frame it, didn't share it. I slid it into the same fireproof cabinet that held the original clause. Because that clause, Clause 18C, had done its job. No court, no fight, no spectacle. Just presence. And somewhere deep in the filing bowels of Civex's Q1 amendment, page 143 to be exact, was a single, quiet line added under section 12.4.7 in the most unreadable font legal could get away with. All protected IP remains under original co-ownership per contributor agreement, clause 18C. That's the footnote they'll never be able to remove. It doesn't name me. It doesn't have to. It marks the day the Foundation reminded them it was still load-bearing. I never yelled. Never threatened. I didn't need to. Because when you build something carefully, when your name is etched into every function, every protocol, every time-stamped line, they can try to overwrite you, but they won't win, because the system remembers. And eventually, so will everyone else.